Now, teaching kids about technology has moved on in leaps and bounds these days. I do remember the heady days of learning how to do an online spreadsheet. Didn't do me any good. I still couldn't tell you how to do it. But now it's more about how to protect children online as well as how to use actual computers. And that's what we're talking about this afternoon, joined by the Department of Education's Protection and Safeguarding Officer, Grania Burns, and Advisory Teacher for ICT, Julie Wilsden. Grania, just explain your role to us first of all. What's the sort of day job involve?
So I do a lot of training. So I train teachers and everybody who works in schools around signs and symptoms of what to look for that are concerning around children. I also offer information, advice and guidance to head teachers when they're concerned about children, and then I kind of work as a conduit between social care and education and things like that.
Okay, and Julie, what's your sort of role?
My role is a bit broader really. I work with primary, secondary and UCM, and I support schools using technology to get the best out of their learning. So I manage all the iPads, all the apps on and off them. I have an overview of the IT curriculum, and e-safety is just a small part of what I do really.
Okay, so on that note, Grania, I wonder how much emphasis there is now on this idea of keeping children safe online compared to how it used to be.
I think overall there's a lot of concern about young people using technology, more around parents and adults not understanding perhaps what young people are doing. And I guess some of the stuff that we would say is that actually you don't need to know in detail what each app is doing or what each game is doing, but there are some rules or some etiquette that we should be trying to have conversations with our children about keeping themselves safe online.
Because it's really interesting. I know the first time I walked into the lounge and heard somebody speaking out of a Xbox speaker, and I was just like, what is going on? And sometimes as a parent, I suppose you don't realise just how far things have moved on.
Absolutely. And from that point of view, there's always those risks that young people are exposed to bullying, inappropriate language, or maybe approached and be asked to do things that actually they really make them very uncomfortable and perhaps are harmful.
And I'm sure we'll come to that in a few minutes, but I just want to come back on something you just said. You mentioned rules and etiquette. Can you give us a rough idea of what you mean by that?
I guess technology moved so fast, very, very quickly, that the rules weren't formed prior to us kind of before the technology was set up. But now there are some things that we're kind of trying to teach young people about: conduct, contact, commercialism, and what's the fourth one? Content. So we're trying to kind of build up some rules around, that the people that you are talking to may not be who you think they are, for example, that the content sometimes is inappropriate and you shouldn't be viewing it or shouldn't be exposed to it. Therefore, there are age ranges and things like that on a lot of games, for example. And also, it's about kind of teaching young people that if they're not prepared to say something to somebody's face, then they really shouldn't be putting those kind of things out online.
Julie, sometimes it's hard as a parent, I think, not just to say, right, do you know what, let's just completely ban them from going on technology altogether. I mean, I suppose, what would you say to that sort of approach?
Absolutely. And when we do sessions for parents in schools, quite a lot of parents say they just want to turn the internet off because it's too big and scary. And really the best way to get through to young people is to be involved in their online life. So try and be active in it, try and find out about it, try and find out the terminology, and genuinely get down and play the games with them. And sometimes they're not really very interesting to adults, but adults would get involved in other areas of a child's life where they are physically, who they're speaking to. But when it's online, people tend to step back from it because they think it's complicated and difficult. But for the most part, young people want to share with you what they're doing, what they're learning about.
Ben, do you want to share your experiences with me?
Not really.
We did try this, didn't we?
We did.
You tried to explain Fortnite to your mum, didn't you? But you weren't
She
too
had a
happy
go
about
at
it.
Fortnite.
And how did she do?
She came 9th.
That's
yeah,
pretty
it wasn't
good.
too bad. But that's the thing, isn't it? I suppose it's difficult sometimes just to understand the complete obsession. And I wonder if we are in the same way that when television first became a thing, was it that same sort of fear and whatever people had at that point? I don't know. I sound like a right dinosaur now, don't I?
It does feel like that, because I think you're absolutely right, because this is the new thing, isn't it, at the end of the day? So when television came out, parents in that age were concerned about it, weren't they? And they were worried about what kids are watching. And I know, for instance, my parents, I remember a portion of time when my parents put the television in the loft upstairs and said, do without it for a bit, you know, because they were concerned about us being glued to it and getting square eyes, you know. So this presumably is the modern version of that. Would you two say that's the case?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that parents are better at restricting what young people do when they're reading a book or watching a film, because that's the media that we know. But they don't know social media and gaming and multiplayer gaming and all those sorts of things. So that makes it, you either get involved and try and understand it, or you're hands off and let them get on with it.
So, Grana, what would you say the warning signs are that something might not be right with the way that your child is interacting online?
Certainly, if there's any kind of changes in behaviour, we would say you really need to be asking yourself some questions. What's going on in my child's life? So that might be that they might become a bit withdrawn. They might become a bit obsessive, perhaps, needing to be online. I guess the concerns are that it's about balance, isn't it? And it's just really, it's about, you know, your child, and it's about recognising when something's a little bit off for them. But certainly we know if children are being bullied online, for example, they may become a little bit withdrawn, they may become sad, really. So it's about recognising some signs in your child that maybe just is not right for them.
And I was listening to a programme the other day about something similar, and the experts on it were saying that they think that children now who are glued to digital devices, whether it's Xbox, whether it's their phones or whatever, by the time they're in their 80s, they reckon it'll average out to be about 21 years that they will have spent on their lives online. And it is something that we've talked about in the past with regards to that case in the UK. It was the first case where a young person was diagnosed as having an actual addiction that was referred to the National Health Service for being online. Is that just a rare case, or do we need to be that concerned about it?
I think we need to think about talking to young people about self-regulation, because a lot of us aren't very good at that with food, with indulging in whatever it is, which is why we watch box sets, for example. We'll watch things end to end and won't self-regulate, and young people are the same. And when an adult will say, get off your phone, put your phone down, turn it off, actually that's the worst thing to do. It needs to be the young person who makes that regulation themselves, to say, I've done this for a while and I'm going to do something different. And I notice a lot of parents will say, put your phone down, but don't offer an alternative. So if you've got an alternative that says we're going out in a minute or we're having dinner, that's a good thing to do.
I'm just thinking about the alternatives that I offer my children, and occasionally they are very much frowned upon, and that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of the time it's just the cause of so many arguments. I would say that the Xbox use is the biggest thing that causes strife in our house, definitely.
Yeah.
There's lots of information, advice and guidance for parents online, by really trying to understand some of the risks or the games that young people are playing. So certainly we can give you some links to some of those sites which you can put on your website. But I think one of the biggest things around adults telling children to put away their devices is that the role models are the adults, and the adults aren't doing it. So I'm in a school a few weeks ago, where teachers were constantly talking about young people being online and being on devices. I got bumped by 3 teachers in the corridor who were just looking at their phones. So the role models are the adults, and until we get our house in order, it's going to be very, very difficult to ask young people to do that.
It's like having phones in the bedroom, isn't it?
Yeah.
People using a phone as an alarm. But the temptation is that you check your phone before you speak to anyone in your family.
Mm-hmm. Just to mention something sort of roughly on the positive side of this, I was with my nephews at the weekend, and they're 5 and 8, and they are on Minecraft a lot of the time. And admittedly, there is always that concern, isn't there? They're always on Minecraft. But I have to say, talking to them, they were both so proud about their creations and what they'd made. And actually, I mean, I haven't played it myself, but there is a lot involved in that game with regards to sort of thinking in a sort of engineering way and being very artistic. And I'm assuming there are also some benefits to come out of this, that we shouldn't be stopping
Absolutely.
them from doing things altogether, should we?
And problem solving, collaboration, spatial awareness, all of those things are really creative. And so as adults in their lives, we should be celebrating what they're creating and not telling them that it's a bad thing all the time.
Don't look at me like that, Ben. The other really positive thing is actually the way that young people are taught about online safety generally. And Ben, at Peel Cloth Workers, I know you've done a lot of work on, sort of how to keep yourself safe online. What sort of things have you been doing?
Like what websites to use and what websites not to use, and like how to keep safe online. And there was this, I can't remember who was in the video, but it was that online one with that girl that left her door open.
Jigsaw.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where she left her front door open, and basically that's sort of saying that if you put certain information out online, it is just like going and showing people all your personal details out on the street, which is something you wouldn't do, but because we have that screen in front of us, it seems like a bit of a barrier, doesn't it? But it isn't always that way. So you mentioned that there are some online things. We'll put those links on the Women's Day blog. But if there are parents listening who are concerned about their child's online behaviour, about the amount of time they're spending on technology, what would you suggest they do in the first instance? And where can they go to learn more information about the games?
Well, one of my favourite websites is Common Sense Media, which any game, any film, any app, social media, you can have a look at it and you can see what parents think and what children think of it. And they will say what age you ought to be and what are the risks associated with it. So it's really, really good. We also have the Isle of Man Safety Centre, which will show you how to lock and block and mute on various devices, which is very useful. And again, we'll share that link. But I think if a parent have any specific worries, they could visit their school, because all schools have teachers who are trained in this as well. And obviously they could contact the department, which is Grania and myself, and we're happy to chat.
What I would like, ideally, is some overall rules for everyone in the Isle of Man. This is how long your children are allowed to go online. This is the age that they're allowed to go on certain things, because that's the problem I think you're up against. I might restrict what he goes on, but if his friend who's the same age is allowed to go on it, that again is another cause for conflict, isn't it?
Of course, that's the cry of all children, isn't it? But everybody else has that game. Everybody else is allowed to do what they like, and I'm the only person that's not.
Yeah.